Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is going to be with FSLogix and uberAgent, and I was really pleased when both FSLogix and Helge from uberAgent reached out to me about their experience with my webinars, and they wanted to do a webinar together, which I thought was a fantastic idea. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to show you the real performance, give you proof. Some of you have probably seen my blog post from the last week by doing logon optimization, and for that I'm using uberAgent. And so I'm your host, Eric. I prefer Eric. It's much easier than you trying to pronounce Ron Eric Haverstein, which could be a bit complicated. We also have Helge Klein, the CEO of uberAgent, that I guess you have a big knowledge to. All his blog posts, he's the profile guru out there, and he has done a lot of presentation on the topic, both on Brightforum and Citrix Synergy. And of course we have Kevin Goodman, the CEO of FSLogix, and the new face, which I was pleased to meet at Citrix Synergy now a couple of weeks ago, David Young, which is the product champion and head of the new beta program that are running for the Office 365 containers. So I was pleased to meet David and also Brad, their marketing chief, face by face the first time. We've been communicating a lot of time, but I met them first now in Synergy, and when I heard about the container stuff, I reached out and give me better access. And the second day of Synergy, I already had this running in my lab, and I tell you guys, I've been testing this a lot, and all my tests show there's zero impact by using this technology, and that is in terms of login speed. So when you enable the container stuff from FSLogix, there's no impact. Of course, the impact is the gain that you will see now during the presentation. So I think we're gonna head it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Eric. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about FSLogix and a little bit about our products before I turn it over to Helge. But I do have to say first, Helge and I met in Germany earlier this year, and I was eager to find out what he thought of this product because, as you know, he's the expert in this on login times, and as you're going to see, his product uberAgent is an absolute must-have if you're trying to manage these types of metrics and data and stuff like that. And we sat down, and being the engineers that we are, we said, well, why don't we put the two products together and prove it? So that's what our plans are today. And I'll tell you, there are lots of other companies that are out there. You see them on the screen here today that have been using FSLogix, and I think that's just a small list that would fit on the screen. There are many more. We did an estimate earlier in the year and found out we were over 100,000 seats in production. And we have the Citrix Ready. We're the Microsoft partner. We have the VMware Ready things. Last year when we put out our first announced our profile containers, we won Synergy's Best of for application and desktop virtualization. Eric, if you'd advance the slide, I'm going to go tell the people about some of the industry experts that have said nice things about us. You should recognize these names. James Rankin is the absence bigot, Rory Mann, Frake, and of course Andy Morgan have all said nice things about us. It's a wonderful thing that we have with Twitter these days. We get to see these things at the same time you folks do. And we cherry-picked these four right now because what you're going to see today, until now, Office 365 on Citrix was pretty much a big pain in the neck. And we have engineering reasons, which we're going to show you with uberAgent, of why we've eliminated all of those performance hits, and still show you, like Frank says, how simple it is. And you're going to see also from uberAgent why the performance is so great. If you'll advance the slide, let me tell you about the product itself. We like to call it Unified Base Image Management. And when we founded this company, my co-founder is Randy Cook. He's from Xemantic, and the FS and FSLogix stands for file systems. We decided to come up with a completely new way to manage your images and to eliminate your Citrix silos that you have, and quite frankly, make your application virtualization. We'll either work alongside your app V to make it 100% of apps, or in cases where you're only using app V in a few places, we can actually eliminate that altogether. Very easy, simple to test, very easy for you to download and see some of the same performance gains that we see as we do that. Basically, what we are is just the isolation piece of app V. Back in the day when storage was really expensive, you used to sequence and package your application and virtualize them, then deliver them at runtime. In order to do that, you had to wrap a bubble around the application so you could spoof administrative privileges and write to HKey local machine or install and see program files and the like that. Now that storage space is not expensive, we're only the second half of that isolation. And if Eric, you'll advance the slide, you'll see one perfect example of that is our Java control. So you can have different versions of Java up and running or IE without having to go through all that issues of, perhaps sequencing and packaging those Java isolates. And it's pretty convenient to go through from one to the other in doing that. The concept behind that is you have an application that's stuck on Java 6, and what you really don't want to happen is you produce a browser that has Java 6 in it, and then the user gets into the outside world and is using Java 6 to go to untrusted websites. So you can make just that URL work for Java 6. Or 7, or whichever version of Java, and then any other URLs you go to get the latest version of Java. That is a key piece of our isolation, but we also have stuff called containers. Eric, if you'll advance the slide, I'll tell them about our application and profile containers. Those containers, what we use them for, and what will be the basis of this webinar is to basically take your non-persistent VDI, take your XenApp, and have it persist all the applications and data between sessions. So get the benefits of non-persistence for the administrator, but to the user it looks like their exact same desktop. In doing that, you can eliminate some of the banes of our IT existence, one of them known as folder redirection. And we're going to go in there and show you, especially we'll be talking about Office 365 today and OST containers, and we're going to show you how some of those files just don't work in folder redirection. And we'll be talking about some of our Office containers as well that'll layer on top of existing UEM solutions. In doing so, let me turn it over at this point in time to Helge so he can show you the tools that he's using to that he sells here, uberAgent, that makes all of this stuff go from guesswork to absolute engineering and reality. Helge, take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everybody. So Kevin mentioned how easy it is to introduce FSLogix and how quickly you get the benefits, and the same is true for uberAgent. You can get it up and running, including the back end, in about 30 minutes. That is, if you're slow. If you've done it before and it's your second or third time, you would need between 5 and 10 minutes. We don't really have a back end per se. In other words, we don't have one of those traditional databases which are difficult to set up in an enterprise environment Instead, we're using Splunk as a backend, and we'll show you a little bit about that in just 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, some of the things that we can do that we're especially good at. I mentioned that uberAgent shows you metrics related to user experience, and one of the first that users actually come into contact with is the logon. And everybody has slow logons. Nobody wants them, but everybody has them, and it's really quite intransparent what's happening during the logon time. There's no metrics built into Windows that you can easily look up. So there's not even a metric for measuring how long the logon actually takes. And uberAgent adds all of that in great detail and quite a lot more, of course. If we can go to the next slide, we'll see that we do understand applications really well too. And one thing about applications is that they typically are comprised of many different processes. That screenshot on the slide, Adobe Reader, for example, it's not just one Adobe Reader process or executable, it's multiple processes. And when you're interested in the footprint or the resource consumption, CPU utilization, memory usage, whatever of that application, you really don't care about that first one, acro read 32.exe, or the second one, you care about all of them combined. And uberAgent, for example, will give you those metrics combined per application automatically. You don't have to configure anything. It works with most of 99% of our applications. So that's a pretty great thing to have. So if we could take a look at the next slide, please. One of the typical things that Citrix administrators have to deal with is that if, for example, Outlook is slow, people call the Citrix admin and blame the Citrix admin, where in many cases it's not the XenApp server. It instead is the backend Exchange in this case, of course. But what do you do as a Citrix admin? How do you prove to Exchange colleague that their machines might be slow? If you go to them and ask nicely and politely, is your machine slow? Are you having some kind of problem? Well, obviously we know the answer to that. It's going to be, of course not. So with uberAgent, you can prove to those guys that they had a problem, if only for 10 minutes time. Okay, so let's advance one more. So finally, I'd like to highlight a pretty neat thing which not many other companies can do. We're actually measuring the responsiveness of the application's user interfaces. So how quickly does an application react to keyboard input, to mouse input, and there are great differences between the applications and between environments, and this really allows you to gauge the quality of the user experience while in a session, while the user is using their applications. So, okay, let's move on to the next slide. I think that was my last, oh no, sorry, there's 2 more. So we basically have a very lightweight agent that doesn't generate any disk I/O at all, quite important in virtualized environments, of course. Minimal RAM usage, and that agent collects all that awesome data and sends it to the backend. We're using Splunk for that. And on the Splunk servers, we have one app that pulls all the data out and visualizes it, has all the cool dashboards you need to work with the metrics and the data we've collected. And then the next slide, if you could advance, please, there's a brief overview of the architecture. It's super simple. We've got the agents on basically anything that runs Windows, both client machines and various kinds of terminal services. We have the Splunk backend, and that's all. Super simple, easy to install, works great. Okay, so let's move on to the actual scenario we're going to discuss in this webinar. Next slide, please.
All right. Good afternoon to all. This is Dave Young. So when Helge and Kevin got together, I think it was a cruel joke on Dave, because Kevin called me up and said, Dave, I want you to create a machine, compare it from us to a traditional PC, and make it live like a real machine. So what I had to do is go back in the archives a little bit and recreate all those things that I told users not to do, that users never listen to their IT admin. They just do what they want to do because that's what's convenient for them. So as I started to recreate that, the infrastructure that we created was this in desktop hosted environment. We turned on folder redirection. We also turned on FSLogix Profile Containers so that we could have two different scenarios for the same machine and a different user. As I built that, I want to make sure that everybody knows that the infrastructure is identical, the login machine is identical, okay, and the user data is identical. Byte for byte, I copied it with the script to make sure that everything that was applied to one system was applied to the other. And as we did that, I got some great results. Next slide, please. At one point, I was feeling pretty good about the results I got, and Helge called me and he said, I've been looking at your data. You need to go fix such and such because, you know, that's a problem. That's why your login's so slow. And I'm like, thanks, Helge. I hadn't even finished 15 minutes worth of work, and Helge's already pointing out things that need to be fixed from an IT perspective. So we believe we have a pretty good functioning environment. My initial login on a very pristine machine, no user data, you know, it's very, very pristine, was around 9 seconds, okay, on both scenarios, a traditional PC with folder redirection and a traditional FSLogix machine with FSLogix Profile running. So I've got a quick little video. It runs about 2 minutes. If you'll go ahead and start the video, I'll talk about it. This is just to show you. Here's a traditional login. We did this based on 2 logins, traditional and FSLogix. And you'll see that this traditional login is what the user usually sees. Now this is not bad. This machine's got about 2 weeks worth of decay on it. When I talk about decay, as a user uses their machine, we all know, first day they get it, it's nice and fast. The 5,000th day that they have it, it's nice and slow. And if we can be in a proactive manner and eliminate some of those bad practices that end users have, we would always have a fast machine. But we know that end users don't do that. Hence is where the FSLogix piece comes. So this particular login takes about 50 seconds to take place. It's repeatable. You can see that there's data on the desktop. These are actual files from projects that I'm working on for Kevin. So you'll see that that is the desktop. And it's going to log out, and we're going to log in as FSLogix, and we're going to use Profile Containers. And you're going to see the difference in the exact same login scenario. So you'll see that as soon as I hit enter, or change the user name and hit enter, that our login is going to be right around 6-7 seconds, which is tremendously different for just making one infrastructural change. And there's a lot of things that go behind what makes that so much better, but ultimately, with a minor change to the environment, I took off 40 seconds of login time for the end user. And when you think about highly critical environments, hospitals, et cetera, where login is the difference between life and death, or just end user happiness, that's huge. I used to do a lot of consulting to the government side of the house when I was at VMware. That was my main sales area. And government employees had been trained that a 9-minute login was acceptable, right? The old joke was log in, go get a cup of coffee, right? Because when you get back, your machine might be ready. And when I was selling desktop virtualization, my favorite thing to do is ask the person that was setting up the meeting when we get into the meeting room, have you ever logged into that machine as you? And they look at me kind of starry-eyed and scared and say, no, why? And I said, well, I'd like you to. And 10 minutes later, they'd be logged in. So let's go ahead and progress to the next slide and talk about some of the actual data, right? Helge, I wanted to actually talk to you about this because, for so long when I was a desktop admin, it was all art, okay? I would take a whole bunch of numbers, how Dave felt about the environment, what I thought was going on, and I'd come up with a calculation for sizing. And it's gotten much better than it was 15 years ago, but there's real science that we can talk about now. So Helge, why don't you talk about some of these numbers and give the team here an update on what we're seeing.
Yeah, thanks. So here we have the uberAgent dashboard that shows per session metrics. So as you can see, uberAgent has a concept of a user session that is not too relevant on a physical PC where you have only one user, but on a multi-user system like Citrix XenApp or any kind of RDS, it's absolutely critical to have detailed information of what the footprint and the resource utilization of sessions is. So here you can see we get average numbers right near the top. So the average sessions RAM footprint, so for example, would be around 254 megabytes, or the average CPU footprint would be 0.4%. And that kind of information is really hard to come by typically with traditional tools or built-in tools that are available as part of the operating system, or even with add-ons like Citrix XenApps. They also don't give you that kind of information. On the other hand, as Dave just said, it's absolutely critical if you want to be able to accurately size your environment. The first question when you start any Xen app, and also of course Xen desktop or other types of VDI projects, is of course, well, the manager needs to calculate his or her budget. So the first question you get as a consultant or admin, well, how many servers do I need to buy? And well, then you typically go, well, that's a good one. Let me go back to the drawing room. From experience, you may be able to come up with pretty accurate estimates, but as Dave just said, that would be basically art. It takes a lot of experience to come up with reasonable numbers, and to take the guesswork out of it and turn art into science, you need a tool that gives you and collects all that, the metrics and numbers for you in an accurate manner that is easy to consume. And that is what uberAgent does for you. So with that, Eric, if you could advance to the next slide, and let's hear some more from Dave, please.
So let's talk about the science, right? And as I start to size environments and look at things, there's all sorts of things as an architect that go through your mind. One of the questions you ask your customers, where would you like your login to be? And they're going to tell you, 5-10 seconds, right? They don't realize all the things that are going to happen as they go through their environment that are going to impact that. So you can see here, this is the comparison, right? 7.78 seconds versus 42.98 seconds. That is a very diverse number as we start to look at it. And let's go ahead and hit the next slide, and we'll actually dig into what's causing that so that we can understand what we need to do to improve that. So we're looking at this traditional login. You can see that the duration of that login is eaten up by several things. User profile, that's usually your biggest one. GPOs are usually your next biggest. They cause you, managing that environment is all overhead that we have to apply to that system. So as we start to look at those things, all these things add up to create what is the login experience to the user. And the user really doesn't care when they come to you and they say, hey, Joe, my login's slow. They don't want to hear that, well, Joe, your login needs to be slow because you've got a lot of stuff on your desktop, and I also have to manage that system, so you just need to put up with that. They don't want to hear it. They want to know that they can get into their system much faster. And as we start to look at things that are happening in the environment for us, one of the introductions that's coming out now that we're all worried about is Office 365. And as we look at that, adding on to that slowness and the fact that people want to now have and desire to have OSTs locally, that starts to change everything we're doing. And I recall an interesting article as I was doing all the research for this, as I was looking up ways to increase desktop performance so I could unengineer that, so I could apply that to a user's bad practice. I came across a very interesting article that said 99 problems in my IT infrastructure, and they're all related to folder redirection. And let's hit the next screen because you're going to see what this folder redirection does. And as we look at that piece, for this particular login, just folder redirection is eating up 15 seconds and some change of that login. And that will get longer as there's more things going on and your environment becomes more complex. And then we add on things, scripts and registry and la-di-da, la-di-da. And next thing you know, you have a very long login in your environment. So that's all on the traditional desktop. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to actually look at some of the data for the FSLogix login. So you can see here that it's 7.78 seconds, okay? That's tremendously different. Identical infrastructure, identical systems. The only thing that is different on these two systems is the desktop background and the login name, okay? So when we think about it from that perspective, to be able to trim off almost 40 seconds in login time, that's huge. Just think of what your end user would think about that. So if we look at the next slide, you can see the major area. Okay, now this slide may be a little deceiving because you look at it and you're like, Dave, that's just a big yellow block just like the other one was. But look very, very closely. It's 0.45 seconds. Okay, that is what FSLogix eats up in that folder redirection. We don't actually use it. It's just an executable piece. What we actually do is we intercept that folder that needs to be redirected, and we throw it into a technology so that we can actually access the different. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide, please. So as we start to look at this, once again, that comparative, 42.98 seconds versus 7.78. And as we look at all the different things that go into that and we're building out our environment, we can now take this data, and as I did my analysis, I ran these systems under light load, medium load, and heavy load. This particular screenshot is a light load. Okay, so at a light load, okay, I came in before everybody else came into the office. I'm at 42.98 or 7.78. And if we look at the next screen, you can see as I added load, what this data starts to look like. Actually, that's one more screen, but hold on here. Let me talk about this. What is that piece that's eating up all that load? What's causing me the problem? And it's the downloading of that volume of data that needs to be presented to the user. IT loves non-persistent desktops, right? I used to speak about it all the time when I was at VMware. I always hoped that I didn't have end users in the room, because if I had end users in the room, they said, whoa, wait a minute, I can't have local mail, I can't save this, I can't save that. Every time it's going to, a persistent user experience is what they wanted. And as we looked at all that stuff, it caused complications in our environment and then caused IT overhead. Let's go ahead and hit the next slide, and we'll look at what the trend starts to turn into. So this is just pretty much a summary. The green is FSLogix profiles. And you can see there's some spikes in there where the file system was just so overloaded. I kicked off some more file I/O scripts, and it was just trying to churn through data. I equate this to the interstate. When you're going to work, if you're on the interstate, 5 lanes, it's beautiful, and you're sitting there going 2 miles an hour, right? You can't go any faster than the person in front of you, okay? When you're going to work at 5 a.m. in the morning, and you're the only one in those 5 lanes, you get to go as fast as you want, minus the police. So if we look at that, you can see how our trend line just below 10 seconds starts to creep up to 10, okay? And it's a very, that linear line, if you projected that out over more and more load, and you projected that out over more and more user decay, it is a slow, gradual, scientific increase, okay? We can watch that. But if you look at the one for the traditional PC, that starts to go from 10 to 16 and continues to grow in that linear motion. And the more load you add, login storms, et cetera, the longer that login time is going to be. And that's why when your users call you at 9 a.m. when everybody's logging in and they say, hey, my system's slow, there's not much you can do about it, because you tell them log in again after the login storms happen, and they log in just fine. So it's that unpredictability of what's going on with the end user that causes us the overhead that means we have to over-design. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And I believe that's turn it back over to Kevin to talk about a little how we make all this happen.
Yeah, so good points, Dave. And after I get done, we're going to have our good friend Helge Klein describe the problems with folder redirection, but that research that you referenced, 99 problems in folder redirection is every one of them, was actually authored by Helge, so that's a great segue. When we sat down and designed this, our CTO, Randy Cook, said that the problems, like Helge said, are not always Citrix. A lot of times they're your back-end servers. So if you take a look at this slide right here, you're going to see our profile and app containers are designed to not impact that back-end server. So it doesn't matter how many people are using FSLogix profiles, the logon time is going to stay consistent. And you can use tools like uberAgent to prove it. Part of the reason why is, quite frankly, we only have to open one file on that server. That file is our profile container. We do not have to open up every one of those files that's on the desktop, reach into it and extract out the icon and the properties information. What
Hey, Kevin,
happens?
on that note, don't I recall in all of our research when I was an old IT guy, there was a math problem on how many file IOs and average queuing and all that wonderful stuff that we had to figure out. Do you recall that math problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, you used to look at the disk queue. You'd go look at the disk queue, and if it was more than twice the number of processors you had, somebody's got to wait to get their file opened. And it is not so much the size of the pipe. It didn't matter whether you had gone to SSD or not. It is simply because that file system can only open files one at a time. And if you think about it, underneath, he has to lock the system so he can get a file handle, so he makes sure he gives out a unique file handle. So when he gets flooded, and you talked about rot, right, Dave? The rot is people stick more and more and more files on their desktop, or they get more and more applications, and that's also redirected. And those all have to be open just to get out the silly little icon and the properties information. That's part of what slows down your login. And I will tell you, we crafted this one so that user only had a 48-second login, because initially the one we did, he had 2 minutes, and we didn't want you to have to sit there and wait for over 2 minutes. Truth is, it doesn't matter how many files stick on the desktop with FSLogix, you're going to get the exact same login time. Because of our unique file system patent pending stuff we have going on there, our file system driver reaches in underneath, and where Windows 10 feels like it's opening a file locally, we're doing all the work over the network to do it as data. All we do is reach inside our container and pull out just the data you need. That also, Dave, is one of the reasons, if you can advance the slide, we'll show you that's why Office 365 is working so well.
Well, you bring up that 365 comment because, the number one thing that we all worry about, right, is where am I going to put the data? And that data has been shifted around the environment for the last 15 years. It used to be on the desktop, then it was in the Exchange server. The Exchange guys said, nope, we can only have so much data. So it went back to the desktop, and then the desktop went virtual, so we tried to go put it out on a network folder, and oh, that's bad, right? So then we threw it into folder redirection, and that data has been kind of moved around the environment, and who's suffered from it? The end user, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So think about it. Okay, so I just described the one situation where you have too many files, and that slows things down because of the opens. The other one is using SMB traffic to move back and forth large files like OSTs. And that's why you'll see that there have been best practices that say don't use an OST if you've got to redirect folders. Well, guess what? In an FSLogix situation, you're not opening files. We are transferring data back and forth. And we've got a few secret sauce things in there to cache read side and burst out writes when it's not busy and stuff like that. But the truth is, if you just look at it at a 30,000 foot level, we are sending TCP data back and forth to that file server. And right, Dave, one thing about TCP data, it's self-correcting. If the packet doesn't get there, we'll ask for it and we'll send it back again. What happens with SMB traffic? Office, like Outlook in particular, never expects a write to fail. It thinks it's local. It thinks it's going to hit the save button. You get a new email and it thinks it's going to succeed. So if there's a little blip on the network, what happens? That OST gets corrupted. We've talked to many customers who have tried to do things. I think even Citrix put out oh yeah, you can do OST files on the network. You just have to follow our very prescriptive recipe right here, and you can do it. And what happens? They corrupt each and every one of their OSTs at least once a month, due to little tiny network blips. And so they basically, internally, the guys from Citrix have told me this, called BS on that document, and I hope the initials BS translate across the country here. But it is, when you get down to it, all the stuff FSLogix is doing is the direct opposite of what folder redirection is doing. We're solving each and every one of those 99 problems. And if you'll advance the slide, I think Helge will go into the issues with that folder redirection. Take it away, Helge.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Well, let's step back a little bit and take a look at what kind of options we have. With what is built into the Windows operating system, well, of course, we have roaming profiles. They work fairly well, but in a stateless system like pooled VDI or XenApp, we don't want to leave behind anything from the user after the user has logged off. You need to clear all that out, delete the profile, and so on. Well, the next time the user logs on, everything has to be brought back. So that works, but it takes a lot of time. And of course, nobody wants to wait for a long time every time he or she logs on. That is why Microsoft, in their sometimes infinite wisdom, came up with that concept of folder redirection. And that is when we actually look at what is happening under the hood, it is extremely simple. So it's not elaborate at all. Folder redirection basically changes the content of a few registry values. That is all. So those registry values contain the location of some of the well-known folders inside your user profile, like the documents folder, the pictures folder, videos, desktop, and so on and so on. And typically you have locations like C users, well, John Doe, and then some subdirectory of that in those registry values. If you redirect a folder, there's exactly one thing happening, and that is that path that used to be local is exchanged for a UNC path to some that points to some file server on your network, like my file server 22 / and some share, and so on and so on. Now, the first problem with that approach is, or let me say differently, the cool thing about that approach is it is super simple. So not much to break, right? Well, yes and no. Well, the first problem with this kind of quote-unquote technology is, well, applications are not forced to actually honor the contents of those registry values. In other words, if I'm a lazy developer and I don't care about all the best practices, maybe I look up the location of the user's profile, so what's this user called, so it's Peter, so his profile is in C users Peter, and then I want to access his desktop or his documents or his app data, whatever, to get some data. I just append that to the user's profile. So I'm just using app data local anyway, regardless of what is stored in the registry. So that is one way to break folder redirection, to well, have badly written applications that don't follow the best practices. Now, of course, some of you might claim, well, our applications are clean and they work well, but probably not 100% of you. There are far too many broken applications out there, unfortunately. The other thing is, when a developer writes an application, he or she tests very well the one exact setup they have on their own machine. And I can guarantee you that the developer's machine does not have folder redirection enabled, which means the developer tests against their own, probably SSD, and that means file I/O is going to be fast. Now, with folder redirection, obviously, every single request needs to go over the network to a file server, which is kind of okay if the file server is highly available and really fast. But if you add more and more users that access that file server in a constant manner, and that is what this picture is trying to show, well, every server has a limited capacity in the number of requests it can process per second. And if you have one user, everything's great. At the second user, two. But at some point, you're going to reach a limit where that file server simply is over capacity. And that wouldn't have to be for the entire duration of the day, because if it happened all the time, everybody would notice and say, okay, that file server is overloaded. We need to buy a second one or upgrade it or do whatever we have to do. But things overload happens frequently only for short periods of time, like when everybody logs on, or when everybody, well, when the virus scanner kicks in, or something like that. And there might be spikes that only take 5 minutes or something like that. So very hard to troubleshoot and figure out what was going on later. But the users, basically the users' applications, are dependent on that file server's latency, on the fact that the file server answers quickly. When things queue up at the file server, the user's application has to wait for something that the application expects to come back, because the developer, as I mentioned, expects the I/O go to the local disk. And the local disk is typically pretty fast, more or less. And so that doesn't happen. The application is stalled, or the desktop is frozen, and we'll see a great example of that in just a little while. And basically the user experience suffers. And there's no way to fix that with what is built into the operating system. There's no tool that helps you with this. And you need to some third-party solution like FSLogix, which is really cool, has a really nice approach at eliminating this entire problem, as Kevin and Dave explained just earlier. Now, if you could advance to the next slide, let me kind of summarize folder redirection. Basically, what we do when we enable folder redirection is we trade, if we log on traditionally with a roaming profile, we have a lot of SMB traffic during the logon because all the files have to be brought in. With folder redirection, we don't have that. So that's certainly a big pro. So if you could click just once. So fast logons, that's great. But on the other hand, we are now dependent on the file server's performance. So basically, we trade one period of very high SMB traffic during logon, yeah, for a period of a constant dependency and constant SMB traffic to the file server for the entire duration of the user session. So basically for all of the day. So we introduce a very problematic dependency on a component on the network. And if you could advance to the next slide, I'm going to show you what happens if the file server is a little bit busier than it should be, and how some super simple things depend on data that is supposed to be local, but in case of folder redirection may not be local. So if you could click just once, please, we'll see start menu search, something stupid and simple. We are typing EV, looking for the event viewer. Now, please take a look at this. This is real. This is on a Windows 7 desktop where typical folders are redirected to a file server, and the file server has a high CPU load. That is all. Nothing else is going on here. It's taking, I think, nearly 30 seconds for this search to come back. For something that is local, event viewer is, of course, not on the network anywhere. It's just local on the same machine I'm typing on. So this should give you, well, food for thought. Think about this problem and think about how best to solve it. Again, I'd like to repeat, I like the approach FSLogix is taking a lot. I said before, their problem, their product is very easy and simple, but solves a complex problem pretty elegantly. Now, I think with that, we're basically through with the official content. I'll hand it over to Eric for now for some Q&A.
Okay, I've sent out a message for people to ask their questions, but we have some questions who has already came in here. So let's see. We're going to address this first one to you, Helge. So this is from Rohan. This feature of uberAgent for getting logon details looks quite similar to the features in Citrix Director. Am I right?
Okay. Yeah, well, that's a very good one. Well, it may look similar, but we get a lot more detail on what is going on during the logon. We couldn't show you everything right in this webinar because, well, of limited time, of course. But some of the things we do that really differentiate from what Citrix has is, for example, we identify any of the processes that are running in the user session while the user is logging on, and we automatically identify things like the logon script. Most companies still have logon scripts, even though Microsoft and others have been telling people for decades not to use them. I think that's not quite right. Logon scripts are perfectly okay, as long as you manage them well, as long as you understand them well. When that is a problem, author that big, complicated, fancy logon script and then changed jobs or left the company or for some other reason it's not available anymore. And so you have that huge monster of a logon script and you don't dare touch it. And when the logon is slow, well, you might find out it's a logon script, but you might have hundreds of commands running as part of that logon script. So how do you figure out which one of those is slowest? Well, uberAgent will tell you that and a few other pretty cool things exactly.
That's exactly correct, Helge. So what Helge is saying, there's nothing wrong with login script. I've been doing a lot of tests. If you follow my blog for the last 2 weeks, you will see there's the big blog post series I'm running now, especially with the first one where we show how Citrix directory is actually showing the wrong number, and there's a tuning that you have to do because Microsoft changed some stuff. But as Helge said, there's nothing wrong with login script. All the tests that I've been performing shows as login script is totally okay. It doesn't affect the login speed, but if there's something wrong with the login script, then it slows down, and you cannot see that unfortunately with directory at the moment. And there's so many details that you can see with uberAgent that you don't are able to see with anything else in the market. Also, to know which processes are running at the time of the login. So I actually have an upcoming blog post on that. I'm gonna give you a sneak peek now. I wanted to know what affects my login. So when I went into the uberAgent processes, I could see that I had AppV running. I had the turbo.net's container running. I had classic shell. So, and of course, not of course, but I also had a Duro PDF printer. So I want to know what's the effect of that, and the only thing that gave me insight about this application running was actually uberAgent. So I did a test and that's coming out, but the effect was only 20 milliseconds, so it's not much, but uberAgent gives us a lot of details. So we're gonna head over to the next question. This is from Jason, and this is for FSLogix. So does FSLogix help with group policies?
I'll take that, Dave. You can jump in if you want to. As a matter of fact, you can reduce the number of group policies that you use for it, but we don't do any particular optimization of the group policies in this version at this time. Yeah, anything to add there, Dave?
No, I'd agree with that. One of the things that you'll see as you implement FSLogix is your overall performance is going to increase, so you have options because you're changing things to simplify and remove some of your group policies. So albeit we don't directly impact and say we go and make group policies better, because of the architectural changes you're making, you can limit the impact that group policy has on your environment.
Correct, and actually, as you were saying here, Dave and Kevin, actually a side effect by going by FSLogix is because you now have folder redirection out of the box, you can actually disable that group policy, so you'll probably save 1 milliseconds of your login time there as well. So,
you know, when you were showing your demo, Helge, you brought up an interesting point as we're talking about all this stuff. As we optimize environments, I was on a project for Kevin. We'll talk about that in just a second. But I was doing some research, and I kept getting this #1 hit on optimizing your infrastructure for desktop or in-app, right? What's the #1 thing everybody suggests? It's disable search. And I was kind of chuckling to myself when you're showing search go slow, because I wanted to interrupt you and say, hey, FSLogix has got a cure for that. As part of our Office 365 product that we're announcing or announced, one of the things we went and did is enabled search to roam with the user as part of the VHD for standalone or single user VDI. And so as we start to look at all those things that impact what is the user's experience, there's just one more thing that we say, hey, that needs to be done differently, and we take it off the plate so you don't have to go do those things. So, you know, the fact that we optimize the environment for you allows you to do different things and shift those CPU cycles to more important things such as user experience.
Yeah, if I might jump in, I'd just like to highlight that everybody recommends disabling search to get maximum user density, but that just doesn't cut it. That recommendation is, sorry for that word, it's total bullshit. It absolutely degrades user experience. You can't simply provide a good desktop, a good Outlook performance and experience without search. So that, well, you need to take all those recommendations with a grain of salt, or 2 or 3 maybe, and implement what makes sense. And that one definitely doesn't make sense at all.
I agree with you 100%.
FSLogix, yeah, especially with FSLogix, because that search is going to go back and be blazing fast, and it persists between non-persistent desktop sessions now, so you don't have to re-index every single time on Zen Desktop with FSLogix.
Cool. So while we're at it, Dave, could you tell us a little bit more about what's coming in terms of OneDrive? Because everybody knows that OneDrive for Business is no-go for our environments, non-persistent. So what's coming?
Well, since we threw the BS flag out there, I'm going to call BS because I disagree with you on that one, Eric. And the reason I disagree with you is actually FSLogix is putting work together. We've already tackled the OST, right? We've got that figured out. We've done it. We're moving that off. It's in beta right now. Expected to go live in the next few weeks, right? So the next piece of that whole Office 365 environment that we need to go attack is OneDrive, right? So everybody's complaining about OneDrive. You just hit the highlight on it, right? And I kind of go, BS, OneDrive's not a big deal because if you throw it in the OST, or excuse me, if you throw it in the VHD, I reconnect that to the user on login, and the problem's gone, right? The user has this wonderful experience. IT doesn't have to worry about all this data coming across the wire every time a user gets a new desktop. I mean, all those problems go away. And the user, which is the most important, we all have to remember in IT, we work for one person, the end user, right? Now, there's layers between all that, but our customer is the end user. End user wants this experience, you know. They don't want to buy the little car that can't do 55 miles an hour. They want the car that can get on the interstate and do 75, 80 miles an hour, right? Or, you know, 140 kilometers for the Europeans over there. So as we look at that, we have to remember as we're designing this that it is around the user experience. So albeit at the moment, Eric, you're right, you know, OneDrive is a huge problem. If you look at OneDrive on FSLogix, the problem kind of goes away. It's a moot point at that point.
It is, and that's what makes me so excited about all the stuff you're doing now. And you are the only one in the market that's actually doing this, using your filter driver to create the containers for the various problems that we have in our non-persistent environments. And all the tests I've done, they are really good. But of course, my tests are limited. I don't have big OSTs that I can do. I do my mail and I do some Gmail just to test, but I have OSTs of 2 gigs and there is 0 impact on performance, and the login time of course goes up. So,
you know, it's funny you talk about a 2 gig. In all this research as we're preparing for this, you know, the magical number, if all things are right, the maximum OST size is 50 gig. And when I first saw that number, I was just like, my mind almost blew up. I couldn't even imagine it. But then as I started working with some customers, and law firms are the worst, they use Outlook as a file repository management system, okay? And as I got talking to these law firms, 50 gig, they were like, is that all I get? You know, they wanted more. You know, they were like, can I have 2 50 giggers? And so as we started to look at all that stuff, you know, you put a 50 gig OST across the network, And I'll let other people that have a lot more experience than I do answer this, but I don't think that's going to be good. I don't think your end user experience is going to be where you want. Helge, you want to chime in on that?
Well, it's hard to not agree with that.
So, we look at that, right? And as we start to think about the amount of data, and I throw a 50 gig VHD on the network, right? Kevin, what's the impact? It's negligible, right? And the reason
with FSLogix, you can't tell the difference between 2 gig and 50 gig, or 200 meg and 50 gig. You just can't. It's unrelated.
When we look at it from the the user experience environment, hey, the users getting what they want, IT's getting what they want, right? They're able to stay within budget, performance metrics, et cetera, et cetera. So it gets a little exciting. I get excited about this because I am passionate. The other thing that we'll talk about, and I just want to kind of close that out because Eric brought it up, is the Office 365. We started with the OSTs. We're moving on to OneDrive. And I hope Kevin, my boss, agrees with this. The goal for FSLogix is to attack that whole Office 365 problem. And there are problems that most IT administrators haven't even thought about, right? Have you thought about, hey, your user has to log in, and we all went through this whole phase in our life of single sign-on, right? The user doesn't want to log in 52 times on their desktop, right? So we went through this phase in our life, single sign-on. That was a big buzzword 7 years ago, right? Well, now with Office 365, if I log into a new machine, I have to authenticate my installation, right? So now the user's got to sign in again. So we just introduced a new sign-on. And so as we start to look at that, FSLogix is very committed to making all those Office 365 problems negligible to the end user, negligible to IT.
Yeah, the deep dark secret at Office 365 is it doesn't roam, and FSLogix is committed to fixing that. We got the first release out here to make sure that your Outlook roams with the same performance as you would have local, and then most of the people that are testing our beta know we're doing the same thing with the rest of it, the global address list, OneDrive, and the like.
And don't forget the wonderful Skype, right? Skype is part of Office 365.
Skype for business, yeah.
Yeah, but let me tell everybody on the call that's listening, don't be confused. It is not part of Office 365. It is a separate, it's a separate product that is packaged together, and it is not fully integrated yet. And there's problems with that, and that's part of the life cycle of software. As we start to introduce new features and things like that, we have those things. But as you're looking at it from an IT perspective, right, there are challenges that you're going to have to address. And FSLogix is committed to addressing those challenges on your behalf so that your life can be a little easier.
Awesome, folks. I think we hit the nail. We have a comment here from Rowan. He's like, is there any scenario where FSLogix wouldn't be the best solution for the user experience?
I'm going to answer this one. I'll just go around I'm going to put Dave's 2 cents in. No. And part of the reason I say that is I've been in VDI for a long time. Since it was poor man's VDI, I had to deploy a second desktop to all my users when I worked at a very large bank. And we did it literally with DNS. Okay, that's how poor man's it was. There was nothing out there at that time. And so as you start to look at all this stuff, I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't think there's a scenario where I would say absolutely FSLogix doesn't work. A couple weekends ago, I was telling Kevin about this. My brother's laptop died, and I hate the fact that I'm the IT support guy for my family, right? I actually have told my mother that I dig ditches for her life. It's kind of an internal joke, so that she doesn't call me for IT help. The best thing I ever did was give her an iPad so that she wouldn't call me anymore. But my brother came over with his dead laptop, and he needed to transfer all of his data. And as I got to going through that, I was like, boy, this would be so much easier with FSLogix. So even on a physical laptop scenario, there's a play for it. And this is one of the projects Dave Young's going to be attacking with Kevin and our CTO, because I think there's a lot of value to the IT infrastructure and to the users to be able to attack all these different problems with FSLogix.
Cool, and that's a great point that you mentioned, just to make sure that people is aware of this. That the same applies for uberAgent. uberAgent is not just for shared hosting; it's for all kind of computers you have in your environment. It works with everything. So if you want to have proper logging of what's going on, doesn't matter if it's persistent or non-persistent, uberAgent will show you all of that, right, Helge?
Absolutely, yeah. We play with basically every version of Windows and every scenario, every incarnation, physical, virtual, whatever you have. We're happy to support it.
Awesome. It's been a great pleasure to have so many smart presenters at the same webinar. I put up the slide here with the email of both FSLogix and uberAgent. Please send your question that way, or use Twitter if you prefer that. If you haven't tried this out, I highly recommend you to take a look at both products, and you will be amazed about what they can do for you. And if you want to learn more about these two companies, I would highly recommend you going to Frontline Chatter from Jaron Gibson and Andrew Morgan. There was recently a show with FSLogix and Kevin, and there's also one of Helge, and explaining his way from a consultant all the way up to creating his new company now, which is Waste Limited with uberAgent. So thank you, Dave, thank you, Kevin, thank you, Helge, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to share the video recording that's going out probably sometime this weekend. Share with your colleagues so people can learn more about the same exciting things that you learned today. Thank you, everyone, and until next time.